The giant insect swamp, 300 million years ago. Now we skip forward. The planet has cooled. The oceans exist. Life has emerged, and for a moment, Earth looks almost manageable. And then the oxygen happened, around 300 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period. Earth was covered in a massive, choking global swamp. Plants and trees were pumping out so much oxygen that the atmosphere became completely saturated. Oxygen levels skyrocketed to 35%, nearly double what we breathe today. And this hyper-oxygenated air acted like a biological steroid for insects, because bugs breathe through tiny tubes in their bodies instead of lungs. Their size is strictly limited by how much oxygen is in the air. In this supercharged atmosphere, they grew to monstrous proportions. If you stood in this swamp, you would be hunted by Meganeura, a giant dragonfly with a wingspan the size of a crow. These weren't harmless bugs. They were apex aerial predators that used their massive jaws to snatch up primitive reptiles right off the ground. On the forest floor, crawling through the rotting wood, was Arthropleura, a giant armored millipede that grew up to 8.5 feet long and weighed over 100 pounds. Imagine a centipede, longer than a king-sized bed, slithering through the dark shadows beside you. There were also scorpions, the size of dogs, and cockroaches as big as dinner plates. A world completely ruled by giant scuttling things. This horror show eventually choked on its own success. The massive forests pumped out so much oxygen and buried so much carbon that they triggered a massive shift in the global climate. The planet cooled, the oxygen levels collapsed, the swamps dried up, and the giant monster shrank down to the bugs we swat at today. Snowball Earth, 700 million years ago. Around 700 million years ago, Earth looked nothing like it does today. No ice caps, no glaciers, no frozen poles. A warm, open ocean world, dominated by one single massive supercontinent, called Rodinia. And then Rodinia started to tear itself apart. As the supercontinent cracked into pieces, it exposed thousands of miles of fresh volcanic rock to the elements. Mega monsoons began battering these rocks. As the rain washed over the volcanic stone, a massive chemical reaction sucked carbon dioxide straight out of the atmosphere and buried it in the ocean floor. Without its heat blanket, Earth's temperature plummeted. White ice caps formed at the poles, and then physics took over. Because white ice acts like a giant mirror. It began reflecting up to 90% of the sun's heat right back into space. This created an unstoppable loop. The more the planet froze, the more sunlight it rejected. The more sunlight it rejected, the colder it got. Glaciers marched from the poles and slammed shut at the equator. Earth was locked in a 2-kilometer thick shell of ice. From space, the planet looked completely dead, a blindingly white marble. If you were dropped onto the surface during Snowball Earth, you would be standing in temperatures colder than modern-day Antarctica, in the middle of its worst winter. The wind would be screaming at hundreds of kilometers per hour. There would be no liquid water anywhere. No food, no shelter, no atmosphere warm enough to breathe without protection. Survival time. Minutes, at best. But deep beneath the ice, volcanoes never stopped erupting. For tens of millions of years, they choked the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. Eventually, the CO2 built up to extreme levels, trapping heat like an ultra-powerful greenhouse. The planet warmed so fast it shattered the global ice sheets in a geological blink of an eye. The sudden violent melting unleashed the most catastrophic hyperstorms the world has ever seen, permanently reshaping the future of life on Earth. The Toxic Oxygen Catastrophe, 2.4 billion years ago. This one is the strangest. Around 2.4 billion years ago, Earth experienced its deadliest catastrophe, and it was not caused by an asteroid. It was not caused by a volcano. It was caused by bacteria doing something revolutionary. Cyanobacteria invented oxygenic photosynthesis. They began using sunlight to split water molecules for energy, releasing oxygen as a completely accidental waste product. Here's the problem. To every living thing on Earth at that time, oxygen was not life. Oxygen was a deadly corrosive poison. For millions of years, the planet fought back. The ancient oceans were packed with dissolved iron, which acted like a giant chemical sponge. The moment the bacteria leaked oxygen, the iron soaked it up, rusted, and sank to the seafloor. creating the massive red rock formations we still find today. But the iron eventually ran out. The oxygen began bleeding out of the water and rising into the sky. The results were apocalyptic. The gas acted like environmental bleach. It triggered what scientists believe is the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. It wiped out an estimated 99% of all life on the planet, chemically burning ancient microbes from the inside out. And then it got worse. The oxygen collided with the atmospheric methane, the powerful greenhouse blanket that kept the planet warm. It tore the methane apart. Without its thermal blanket, Earth's temperature instantly plummeted. The planet was plunged into its very first global ice age, a brutal, crushing freeze that lasted 300 million years. Life itself nearly ended because of oxygen, the same gas you are breathing right now. The Mega Flood Desert. Around 6 million years ago, a massive shift in Earth's tectonic plates literally cut off the Atlantic Ocean from the Mediterranean Sea. With its primary water supply blocked, the Mediterranean became a trapped bowl. Because the region was incredibly hot, the water evaporated faster than rivers could refill it. Within just 1,000 years, the entire Mediterranean Sea completely dried up. What was left was a giant apocalyptic desert basin, dropping over 2 miles below sea level. If you stood down there, it would feel like standing on the surface of another planet. The air pressure was so heavy, it would make your ears pop constantly. The temperature routinely soared past 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire seafloor became a blinding white wasteland, covered in a mile-thick crust of pure salt. For over 500,000 years, this suffocating, boiling abyss divided Europe and Africa. But the real terror came when the barrier finally broke. The tectonic wall at the Strait of Gibraltar began to crack, and the entire Atlantic Ocean came crashing in. It started as a waterfall, but the sheer force of the water quickly tore the canyon wide open, unleashing the unstoppable Zanclean flood. This wasn't a normal flood. It was a catastrophic wall of water, moving at highway speeds, with a volume 1,000 times greater than the Amazon River. The roar of the incoming ocean would have been deafening from hundreds of miles away. It filled the entire Mediterranean basin back up in less than 2 years, sometimes raising the water level by over 30 feet in a single day, erasing everything in its path. The boiling hothouse. Around 56 million years ago, Earth experienced a sudden, terrifying spike in temperature that pushed the planet's climate to its absolute limit. A massive surge of carbon was injected into the atmosphere, likely triggered by intense volcanic eruptions and the sudden melting of frozen methane deposits on the seafloor. Within just a few thousand years, global temperatures skyrocketed by up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Because the planet was already completely ice-free, this heat spike transformed Earth into a hypertropical, suffocating hothouse. Palm trees and alligators began thriving in the Arctic. The regions around the equator became completely unlivable. Temperatures crossed 100 degrees with near 100% humidity, creating a wet bulb effect that would instantly kill a human today. But the real horror was happening in the oceans. As the atmosphere absorbed the massive influx of carbon, it dissolved into the seawater. This triggered rapid ocean acidification, turning the world's oceans into a giant corrosive bath of mild acid. The acid dissolved the shells of marine organisms. The entire deep-sea food chain completely collapsed. The extreme heat starved the oceans of oxygen, triggering massive dead zones where fish and marine creatures literally suffocated in the hot water. On land, the heat forced a bizarre evolutionary panic because resources became scarce and mammals couldn't shed heat efficiently. Animals began to dramatically shrink. Early primitive horses shrank down to the size of house cats. Ancient primates became miniature versions of themselves just to survive the climate. This boiling nightmare gripped the planet for over 100,000 years. The Great Dying, the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. Around 252 million years ago, a massive chain of supervolcanoes began erupting through giant fissures in the Siberian crust, pumping out continuous flows of magma. They vomited enough lava to bury the entire United States under more than a mile of molten rock. But the lava wasn't the main killer. As the magma blasted upward, it shattered through colossal underground deposits of coal. It essentially set the planet's fossil fuels on fire, blasting trillions of tons of toxic gas straight into the sky. Temperatures on land soared past a lethal 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, the oceans were stripped of up to 80% of their oxygen. Marine life suffocated in mass. And then the disaster took an even more terrifying turn. With the oceans hot, stagnant, and starved of oxygen, anaerobic bacteria began pumping out massive invisible clouds of hydrogen sulfide gas. This toxic gas bled out into the atmosphere, wrapping the entire planet in a silent cloak of poison. If you were standing on Earth back then, you wouldn't just burn from the heat. You would be choked to death by the very air you breathed. The gas was so potent, it dissolved the ozone layer, allowing lethal UV radiation from the sun to blast and mutate the surviving life on the surface. By the time the eruptions finally stopped, 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land animals were completely wiped out. It was the closest life on Earth ever came to total annihilation. So, all of this, every single version of Earth described in this video, every ice age, every acid ocean, every oxygen catastrophe, every boiling century happened here, on this planet, in this orbit, under this sun. The Earth you are standing on right now has already survived things that would end any conceivable human civilization in hours. And the most unsettling part? Most of what happened here was triggered not by external catastrophe, but by the planet's own chemistry running out of control, by bacteria, by oxygen, by tectonic plates shifting by centimeters per year, by a small change in the angle of an orbit. The difference between the Earth you live in and the most terrifying versions that have existed is not as large as you would like it to be. It is a matter of chemistry, and chemistry can change. It has before.